So I've already introduced the topic of this blog in the above writing. I'm discussing a meeting as part of Curtain Corner, which was titled Finkelstein or Frankenstein. It was called so because Frankenstein is defined as the creation of a monster that could lead to disaster, and many people within the Australian media feel the Finkelstein Inquiry is of the same nature. So we began the meeting by discussing Minister Stephen Conroy's remarks. There is a need for a healthy and robust media, and to achieve this we need to strengthen the independence and effectiveness of the Press Council. And he also said, I don't need an inquiry to tell me that 70% of the media is owned by Murdoch. So that was our starting point. We discussed what the inquiry was. It claims to be independent. However, it's interesting to note that of 11,000 submissions into the inquiry, 9,600 were via an advocacy group. 41 people gave evidence during this inquiry, and there were 444 submissions that showed concern for media concentration. This links back to Conroy's remarks about Murdoch. So obviously a lot of people are concerned about that, but not as many as I expected there to be. It's interesting that a lot of the submissions came in via a group AAZ.org, who are an advocacy group, and many of the stuff they publish on their website is attacking Murdoch Press. It's very highly charged and very biased material on there, so it's interesting to see that that's where remarks were coming from. So there is obviously room for bias in this report. One of the main sections of the report underpinning reform proposals asked the question, is there a problem and what is its cause? It identified as the main problems market failure, which again is about the media press concentration, ownership concentration, and it also mentioned foreign ownership as being a problem. Didn't at any point say what is going to be done about it and what could be done about it. There was no suggestions of solution, and many people within the meeting put across the viewpoint that to take away foreign ownership and to reduce the number of papers owned by one person would lead to fewer newspapers existing within the market. If we took all the Murdoch owned papers and reduced it to just one, there wouldn't be the competition and the options for reading that there is now. So that could be a problem in itself. And whilst obviously a lot of people are against the media being so concentrated, there isn't an obvious solution for it. We need to have competition within the marketplace for there to be a need to people to keep regulating and questioning the readings of the newspaper. Another problem mentioned was information asymmetry. There is not sufficient information to evaluate the quality of the news. One criticism against this was that you don't need lots and lots of information to evaluate the quality of the news. Most readers aren't just taking in everything they read and not questioning it. It's kind of assuming that the intelligence of the readers is very low to think that that is how people receive their press. Interestingly, it also identified general distrust of the media as being a problem, but I felt that that was contradicting the above point that people aren't evaluating the quality of the news, because surely if they distrust, they would then be evaluating quality. Further to this, another main problem identified was that news media can cause harm, and it says there are striking instances of harm. However, it's kind of ambiguous about this idea of harm, and it was thought that this is definitely a failing of the inquiry, because the three examples that it gave of media causing harm were not striking, as it suggested, and were not always the media's fault. It mentioned a police chief who was forced to resign after false accusations fed by a minister's advisor, Well, obviously if these false accusations come from a minister's advisor, that's the root of the problem, not the media reporting that the advisor said that. It's kind of a case of don't shoot the messenger, like the media didn't make up this accusations, the minister advisor did. So that was felt to be a bad example to illustrate that point. Another bad example given by the report was about a minister who was forced to resign due to his homosexuality. Well, yes, it was the media that reported his homosexuality, but it wasn't the media that forced him to resign, that was the government. So again, it's a case of shooting the messenger, and a poor example of the media causing harm. The final example was nude photos of a policeman, which were published without being checked and turned out to be fake. Yes, that's an obvious, definite failing of the media, but it is also a rare case and questionable as to whether it's striking. The policeman in that case didn't lose his job, only it was his reputation that was damaged. And yes, it is a problem, but it is sort of questioned of how far does that go to prove that point. Two more problems that were mentioned within this weren't listed specifically in the same way that the others were. They weren't sort of handed to you, they had to be found within the pages. And one of the things that was mentioned was the failure of self-regulation, that press is unable to deal with irresponsible reporting. Criticism of this is that irresponsible reporting is a loose term, and it wasn't defined exactly what this means. And the codes of ethics have improved in Australia, but obviously not enough. But an argument against this part of the report was that it's not an exclusive problem to Australia, that's a worldwide problem. A further point that was picked up, but again it was sort of hidden within the pages, not presented with the other problems, was the fact that online media is unmanaged and uncontrolled. But yet again, it's not a exclusive Australian problem, that's a global problem. So I think it's wrong of the report to position this as being an Australian problem. Joseph, who gave the meeting, mentioned his own submission to the inquiry. He said that he identified a weakness of being that this could send the Australian press backwards. He was at no point to emphasise truth being an imperative in the code. There is no mention at any point a need for truth, and he suggests this should be of the first importance, and there's no mention of it in the Press Council's codes. And the response that he got for this submission was that there is an emphasis on accuracy, and accuracy is above truth, whereas all of us in the meeting disagreed with that. Accuracy isolates facts but doesn't give an entire story. For example, it may be accurate to say that a vicar was seen entering a premises, and it may also be accurate to say that premises is known to be a brothel. But it does not mean that it's truth to say the vicar was engaging in activities with prostitutes. It's just two separate accurate facts which have been pulled together to make something which is not truth. You can see in that example that truth and accuracy are not the same thing. It was mentioned in the report about free speech, and we wondered where this actually fitted in. It's quite clear that journalists are sort of losing the right to free speech, and freedom of speech only works as a defence in matters of government and politics. So it's just an interesting thing that got mentioned. They talked about reform and what changes are going to be made. We felt that there was a problem in the fact that front page news stories could be wrong, and when they are, the redress of this is a very small paragraph in the middle of the paper apologising. one of the reforms that we thought would be good is that if they've printed a front page story or a major news story that's been wrong, there should be a front page or major page apology for that, not one small paragraph given at the back of the paper. A criticism of the whole report, which provides sort of 10 points of reforms and 10 points of problems. Lord Nichols suggests that we need to be mindful that in the hands of a hostile judge, these 10 points could become ways to trip the media up. And it urges that people that consider this report and the reviews mentioned can be flexible and mindful of that. One final criticism that we identified was that it mentions public interest, but at no point does the Press Council or the report sort of define exactly a strong case for public interest. It defines it as involving a matter capable of affecting the public at large, so that they are interested enough to discuss what may happen to them and others. This, we thought, was more about public conversation than public interest. To have something affect us enough to discuss it with others doesn't necessarily mean it's public interest. I think that's a failed defence, and many people that have defaming things published about them could argue that it's in the public interest, but public interest and public conversation are two very different things. So overall, we felt this inquiry was flawed in a number of ways. It's interesting to note that there was a Senate report investigation in 2000 out here in Australia, and the findings of this were that people got nowhere to go when they wanted to complain, and they questioned the efficiency and the effectiveness of self-regulated media. They wanted an overseeing body, but here we are in 2012, 12 years later, and none of the proposed changes of this report have actually been put into play. So it'll be interesting to see if in 12 years' time, if the Finkelstein report has made any difference. I think that's all that I wanted to talk about from the meeting, but it was a very interesting thing to go to, and hopefully it's helped me understand a bit more of what changes may have come from the Leveson inquiry, which I'm really interested to hear more about when I return to the UK.